who's 30 years older than I am. He's 90. And so it's family, and I have other relatives, a niece that sculpts, and a nephew, and it seems like it's in everyone in the family draws. So
could you, before we get into some, I know you're going to show us some of your work, and we're going to talk a little bit more about sculpting in general, but can you talk some about that freedom wall that you created?
Yeah. Now, this was 12 years ago for me, so it's a little bit like Heraclitus' story of, when you step into a river and you step out, you step back in, it's a different river. Except in this case, I'm the river. And so I've moved on. The sculpture has stayed the same, and that's one of the positive things about sculpture, that at least for me, is that you're creating something that's enduring. And it probably is a very ancient, early man kind of need to create something that's going to last. I rather imagine that when people had deaths early on, that they put clay on people's faces or to try to preserve them, and because of loss, people wanted to hold on to something. And I think poetry is much about poetry is about loss, and lots of sculpture is about loss. It's about trying to just keep something, to endure. And for me, the freedom sculpture was about I felt something very personal in my life. There was a sense where I wanted to be free of something. And then I thought, if I sculpt this and it's just that personal, it's going to be more like a kind of an art therapy thing. I wanted to make it more universal. And I thought if I can get very deep, profoundly personal in my own discovery, my own exploration and search, that the piece then would have a universal feeling, that other people on that level will be able to appreciate it. Again, I think good poetry does that. And so at least that's what I was reaching for. So I tried to create a sculpture, and I did what's called first a maquette, a small model. And do you want me to keep talking about this? Because I don't know if you want to ask questions.
I do. But can I ask you one question before you go in?
Yes.
And thank you so much. That was great. I wanted to ask you, how do you do that? How do you get into yourself so profoundly in order to then transfer that into the sculpture? How did you do that?
Well, I've always been introspective, and I mean, I think most of us, to some degree, are more or less introspective. And I've always done a lot of reading. I love philosophy and poetry, and much of that reading informs my thinking and stimulates my thinking. I think that helps. And so that you can read what other people have thought about, in this case, freedom. You can look at other artwork and see what people have thought about it, because it's not just all verbal knowledge, it's also nonverbal. There's freedom that you see revealed in sculpture or in painting. You see it in dance. You see it you can hear it in music. So I went to various sources and again kept looking into myself as well, and talked with people. And then I took up clay, because as a sculptor, it really doesn't happen till it has to happen. It did to my fingertips too. I can't just cerebrally think it up in my head. So you start to feel it happening as you take the sculpture up, you start to create it. I mean, I had an idea. I had a rough sketch that I made and then started to make it in clay. And what usually you do traditionally in sculpture is you start with a small model, because it's easier to move around the model and you don't have to worry about details. You're just working on the big concept. And it's called a conceptual model, or maquette. And I did I think it was about a 9-inch high little model that eventually became a 20-inch figure, a 20-foot piece. I mean, a 20-foot piece. And and I wanted to get a sense of movement, because sculpture, it tends to be very static, and so I wanted to show a sense of sequence, because I wanted to explore and create the idea of struggling to break free, because of freedom suggests sort of the yin and yang, a bondage or being locked into something. So I wanted to show. To show black, you have to show white and hot, cold. I wanted to show a figure that was actually locked into a wall. And then as it struggled, it broke free. And that it shows the range of the action. And it also gives a sense of time and movement. So although this sculpture has 4 figures, it's really one figure going through the motions, through the action of breaking itself free from something that's holding it back. And again, for me, a lot of it also has to do with mortality, and it does, when people work in art, often especially in sculpture, they're trying to create something that is lasting, because we're not. Because we're so transient, because time is always fleeting, and because everything changes. And going back to Heraclitus, so I wanted to create something that has all of that in it. And as I say, it's there's a sense of, if you look at it, almost of Lazarus come forth kind of a thing. It's almost like a death. You almost see a figure that's almost like a kind of a mummy at the far left. And as it struggles to break free, there's a kind of a space that's almost like a grave, that it's escaping a grave. And for me, it's escaping mortality for the time being, at least in a sense, by creating something that's going to be long lasting. In my case, it's sculpture. For someone else, they might create something else, in whether it's in the arts or maybe family or whatever, something that keeps them alive or keeps their memory alive or makes them feel that that they're not just in this moment, that they're going to project themselves into the future, in a sense, and beyond their lifetime. So that's what I was doing with this, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely leaves a legacy. And I think no matter who will walk by this.
The other thing
I think no matter who will walk by this, they will have an experience immediately.
Well, I had a friend of mine who was a developer came in and was looking at my work, and there was a building that they were building that he wanted to have a sculpture for, and I showed him this piece. And he said, well, can you do this? It was only 9 inches high. He said, can you do this 20 feet long? And I said, yes. And but 20 feet, there might be some changes. But as I developed it, I thought I wanted to keep the sense of this rough sketch, because I didn't want the figures to be too specific. I wanted people to see themselves in it. I thought the more mystery that's in it, the more they can read, they can see into it. You can interpret it more. And I remember I had one of the sitters I had, Don McLean, said to me that when I asked about American Pie, is that he didn't like answering people about what it was about, because he wanted them to come up with their own conclusions of what it was about. And in this case, I didn't want this to be so definitive that people would, like some of my sculptures, for example, of Arnold Palmer or some of the other figures, they're Arnold Palmer. But this, you can put yourself into it. And in fact, I've got a place in the far right, there's that empty space where it says stand here, where a person can stand in there and become part of the piece. So it's interactive, but also, it's meant to be not so, there isn't a portrait on any of these figures, because you're supposed to put yourself into it. At least that's what I was hoping. And there's enough going on in it that people can see their story. I mean, I've heard people say so many different things about what it means to them. Mm-hmm.
Did I read correctly that I read that that you put figures into the sculpture that were people that you knew, and that there was a cat in the sculpture? Is that correct? Yes,
there's a cat in that I had for 20 years, and before it died, I had it pose. And then, of course, once it died, I think, before I finished this, so I put this little sculpture in there. But I put it very low. It's about a foot off the bottom of the sculpture, so children can walk over and touch it, and it can relate to them on that level. It's a little bit of an immortality for the cat, like the Egyptians tried to do, I guess, with
sculpture.
Their cats. But there's a lot in there. I mean, the main thing, I knew when people were going to be driving by the sculpture and seeing it very, very quickly. So I wanted them, if they're only going to get a quick glance, to see the big picture that they were going to get, was the sense of figure struggling to break free, and then getting free and being elated that it's free, and the hands are outspread. Now, if they had time, and if they worked in the building, or they walked past it every day, I thought, well, I didn't want them to get bored, because that's just one major statement. I wanted them to see something more, so I went into it and I put things into the background. And so you can see there's a kind of a hand. I put in clay with my hand. It starts static to the left. It gets more vibrant as it moves to the right to reflect the action. And then I put in, as you said, figures of people that I knew. My father's in there, my mother. It's personal, but people like T.S. Eliot put theirs, towns they lived in, and into the four quartets, into other poetry. People put personal things into their art. But this has, for example, my father, when I had done a sculpture of my father, and I took the wax and I dropped it, and so it cracked into large pieces, and I put in the pieces because he was kind of a fractured person in a way. But underneath that, I put another sculpture that I found I use this old plastiline, it's over 100 years old, and another sculptor I got this clay from who had died, and I don't even know who he was. I put his little child sculpture behind my father's head so that there's a child under the man, under the adult. There's a lot in the sculpture for people to see, little puzzles in a sense, which I think makes it more interesting. There's a lot of figures. There's a little tombstone in there. There's figures floating through it. There's I've got my birthday in it because I've got some coins on the base that are 7 cents and 51 cents. I also have, among other things going on here, this is a lesson on how to do a sculpt, how to do a figure, because it starts with a very general figure on the left and it develops as it goes to the right. Although that final figure is never totally finished because we never fully develop. So it's a figure that's in development.
And we're always breaking free.
Hopefully,
yes.
So we're not giving up, and there's the struggle, and the Buddhists say life's suffering, but I think life is also, it's a struggle, and this is about maybe taking some joy in the struggle. Maybe that's a little more Nietzschean, but it's about overcoming and breaking free. And as I say, so my sculpture tool is in there. My hand, my face is in there as well, and because I did it, I'm in the whole thing. But it's a piece that, as I say, I did 12 years ago, but I'd say it's my favorite sculpture because it is a personal statement, yet I think it's obviously the piece that more people have reacted to of all the pieces I've done.
Yeah, it's magnificent, and I love the way you describe. I don't think I've ever been able to describe breaking free as much as you have just done it right now, because I think what I've always tried to get across to people is the more we share, and the more, that we have to. Freedom comes from something. You don't get free from nothing. It's a constant thing, and I love what you said about taking the joy, and being joyful with it, because it is a struggle. But the joy that you get from breaking free and the things that we accomplish and we learn is just so marvelous. And we really need to share. We all need to share our experiences so that people who are so scared to do it can know that it's more joyful than anything, even with all the pain.
Yes. There was a time when I almost made this as a circle so that you struggle, you break free, and then it starts again. Because it's kind of a continuous, it's not a one-time thing usually, and then for some people, if they have certain problems, then they break free, and that's that particular struggle. But then there are other struggles. Right. So I almost made the ends, and there was a concept I had for it where the two ends come together, and so that after you went from being bound and you struggled, you got free, and then you started again with another form of bondage and got free over again, and it would be continuous.
We have somebody on the chat that I just want to just comment about, because they wrote a beautiful thing. This is Word Bite. I don't know if you know who this person is, but no. They wrote, "The sculpture is interesting in the way that it shows process, and even more so, enlivens the surrounding space."
Oh, well, that's very nice. It's funny for me to be rather ironic to be talking about sculpture, because sculpture is something nonverbal, and I'm trying to express. If you ask me, for me, what is freedom, and then I sculpted it, this is what it is. So I want to almost to just show it to you. And it's talking. Words aren't the same thing. There's the story of Wittgenstein that in his classroom where he showed somebody I think it was matches, a book of matches. And he said, "What is this?" And one of the students said, "It's a book of matches." And he threw it at the student and said, "No, that's what it is. It's the thing itself." So it's not words. So everything I say about sculpture while we're talking is what it isn't, because it's not words. Right. It's just like if I was talking about music, it wouldn't be music itself. And if I talked about dance, it wouldn't be dance. You'd have to. It's almost as if you asked me, and we have time, you asked me what is various questions. I should be here in clay sculpting for you, because I'm not really a wordsmith. What I do is sculpture. So we're kind of in a way maybe talking around it.
Well, and because, and it's great. And you know what we're fortunate about is that, you know, so many times, you know, extraordinary artists like yourself, we don't get to talk to. We don't get to hear. You're right. I mean, they've come and gone, and we don't understand it all, and we never will. But we have this opportunity with you now to really understand a little bit, and I can only be a little bit, because I understand what you're saying in the most profound sense, that words just don't do it justice.
Well, and on the other part is sometimes people have asked me, how long did it take you to make the sculpture? And you know, when they asked me recently, I just say, well, it took 60 years. In this case, I think at this time in 2000, I don't know, I'm trying to remember how old was I, 1951. You know, it's whatever it was. It takes a lifetime.
Right.
You know, it doesn't take the 2 years it took to make the sculpture. And you get a lot, you can get much of that in the sculpture. You're getting your life. Just like if you're writing a novel, if it took you a year to write the novel, it didn't take you a year to write the novel. It took you whatever life you had up until the point where you wrote it. Mm-hmm. So it's hopefully, you know, you get a lot of that. That's profound. That's why people can go back to it over and over again and see more in it, because they're not seeing, you know, the year or the few months that it took. They're seeing, you know, a lifetime. Right. They're seeing your journey in a sense.
Right. And I have to tell you, you're doing a phenomenal job, even though you have said several times that you're not a wordsmith. You have done, you're sculpting your words very well.
Well, thank you.
And I'm really understanding so much, and I appreciate it very much, because you're doing it in a really very, you know, in an easy way for us to understand what you're talking about. So I really appreciate that. And I want to remind everybody out there that you are more than welcome. I invite you to please call in and you know, if you have something to say about that particular sculpture, or you've had other experiences, call in at 919-518-9773. We'd love to have you take part in this conversation. Zenos, when I was talking to you today, I was sharing with you my experience, having had an emotional experience in my life at one point, and I never took an art class in my entire life, ever. And I had this really yucky thing happen, and I went and took a sculpting class. And I had the privilege of sculpting a female nude. And I was like, I could not believe how amazing this was, and how exciting it was for me to be able to create a muscle in her leg, in her right leg. When I got the line that I could see this thing in her, and I could see it then in the leg that I created. It was amazing. And I look at it all the time. I keep it in my office because it means so much to me. So I know that somebody else looking at it might not realize what it took for me to do that muscle, or how the proportion of her boobs was so difficult. It wasn't just doing a breast. It was really difficult. But I got it done, and a belly button, and it was very exciting.
Well, I think we spoke about this a little. I think that it was probably a very good thing for you to do at that point in your life, because it gave you a sense of empowerment, because you were taking amorphous clay that looks like this. It has no shape itself, and you had to deliberately shape it and make it into something. And you were, I think, fortuitously, you were shaping it into a female figure, which in a way, it's a reflection of yourself. And maybe on some level, you realized that you needed to reshape yourself, and you had the power to do that. And so I think it was probably a very therapeutic, a very good thing to do.
It was an amazing thing to do.
Because we do have some degree, and I think we talked about this, have some sense of control and power over our events. I mean, there are of course there are accidents and there's chance, but there's so much that we realize it, where we can kind of take control, and we can shape our destiny, shape ourselves.
Yeah. And we have a question on the chat again, and it's Zenos, my son would like to know what tools and materials you use to make your sculptures. Can you show us from your studio?
Well, this clay isn't made anymore. Some of it is over 100 years old. Some of it was used to make the Lincoln Memorial and other sculptures like that all across the country, a lot of the old figurative sculptures. And I've gotten it. It has all natural materials because they didn't have synthetic materials when they made this. Olive oil, earth. It was a secret formula when it was made, and so it gets recycled. See, I'm doing this now because I was listening to a book on. I love history, and I listened to books and lectures while I'm working, and to continue my education. I was listening to one about World War II, and then about Eisenhower, and I thought, well, I'll sculpt Eisenhower for fun, and I started to sculpt him, and as I say, so I use this old plastiline, and I use these tools that are handmade. Now, I bought this clay from sculptors that have died, from their estates or the people that were left behind. And then I also got old tools. Now, these tools belong to a time before you could go to an art supply store and buy them. They're all handmade for the most part. And they're beautiful tools. You can see some of them, they're almost a piece of sculpture themselves. They're beautifully made, so they fit into with a tool, and you lose this when you buy sculpture tools usually. A tool should be something that's for a purpose. In this case, see this tool, I carved this myself so that it goes into the eye here. See, and I can turn the eyeball, and if you can see it, and bring you a little closer. Or I can go into the ear with this little ball end. Do you see it?
Uh-huh.
And I can make the ear. I can make a nostril. You know, I can make the corner of the mouth. So it's a tool because it's for a purpose. A lot of the tools that were made that are being sold today are just tools that they started like this maybe many years ago. They made them cheaper and cheaper, and people are making them who don't sculpt and don't know. They don't have them. They're not made for a particular purpose. So my advice to the young man is, if he wants to do sculpture, as he develops, he starts making his own tools. You get wood, wire, or you adapt the tools that are there. You can see I even took a little hammer here that I made, and you can pat the head to get a kind of nice shape.
Stop messing up with Ike. He looks fine.
He needs a little bit of work. He's not finished yet, but this is the general, 5 stars. You see them here.
Beautiful.
And I've got Churchill back there, if you can see him. But that one is already finished, and I cast it, and taking the rubber off of it messed up the face.
So do you cast? Do
I don't know
you
if you
sell?
can see some of the other pieces I have.
Yeah,
Just
I'd
didn't see
like
any
to see
others.
What is that? Who is that?
Oh, this is Michael Kahn. He's he teaches acting at Juilliard, and he's the head of the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C. And I was commissioned to do a life-size statue of him. And in addition to the statue, I asked the client, would you like to see my idea of what I would do? And so I did him on a stage. I don't know if you can see it. And I made him as a key figure. You see the keyhole?
Yeah.
And I put some of the actors that he worked with in the background. I have quotes from Shakespeare next to the actors. There's, for example, Kelly McGillis, and there's a quote from her, and there's Hal Holbrook, and there's a quote from one of the Shakespearean plays he was in, and so on. And Shakespeare's up there. You can see the skull down here from Yorick. I don't know if you can see it. And but anyway, it says all the world's a stage. And then there's the. In this particular case, they still wanted to have just a figure. They thought it was a little too large, so this is just something I did as an exercise. You always learn from things. And now if I could turn you slowly around, can you see this piece up here? It's a big book.
Keep going. Where?
Can you see it?
Yeah. I see it.
You see it?
Yeah.
Let me move over. You can also see this is my uniform. I do a lot of research. Besides all the photographs of Eisenhower, this is an actual uniform, the kind that he would have worn. There's also an Eisenhower jacket over there. But this is I had a client who wanted a sculpture of knowledge is power. And so what I did, and left it up to me. Can you see me?
Yep.
So I've got Darwin here. This is a large book in clay. And it'll be cast with rubber over it. It'll be in bronze. It's about 12 feet long. And she's going to be holding the book up with her brother. And here's Einstein. And then there are a lot of people in the book. I I've got Socrates, and I've got quotes, which is kind of a different thing. I don't know if you can see it. Should I bring it closer?
Yeah, I'd love to see it closer. I can't. Yeah, can you see it closer? Oh, there.
All right. Can you see it?
Yes. Oh my gosh, look at that.
Do you see it?
Yes.
Now,
yes.
If you see, for example, I don't know if you can see. Here is none of these are finished yet, but here is Harriet Tubman, and I've got a quote that says, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves." And then there's her face. And here is Harriet Beecher Stowe, and there's Emerson. I've got FDR up here. Up at the top, I've got, I don't know if you can see it, I've got Margaret Sanger. It says, "No woman can call herself free who does not own and control her own body." I've got Susan B. Anthony, "Suffrage is the pivotal right." Down here, I've got Nietzsche and Turing. I mean, there's a lot of different people. I've got Rachel Carson. Okay, and then if you can see her here, can you see it?
Yes.
And let me see. I'm looking at my finger. Here's an eagle, and her quote is, "Can anyone behave if it is possible to lay down such a barrage of poisons on the earth without making unfit for all life?" And I've got John Muir, and so on. And I'll come over here. You can see the Einstein's quite large, and you can see him. See him?
And where is this going? Where is this going?
This is going to a high school, Central High School in Philadelphia, and so it should be interesting for the students. Here's, do you see Martin Luther King? There's Freud. Gandhi's up here, and over there I've got Niels Bohr, and they've got and they've got Anne Frank down here. Can you see Anne Frank?
Yeah.
And her quote is, "In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart." And I've got Isadora Duncan at the bottom, and so you can see there's just a lot of Shakespeare, and there's a lot of other figures and things, and I've got music, I've got Beethoven, and now over here is another piece that's going to be almost 50 feet tall. I don't know if you can see it. You see it? It's a metal.
Yes. Yes.
And the piece looks, I don't know if you don't have here's a picture of it with my niece standing next to it. Do you see it?
Uh-huh.
That's what it looks like at the Bronze Foundry. And it's a piece about growth. And there's a DNA form in here. You see the double helix? And it's going to have some bronze puzzle pieces on the side here.
So you love what you do, don't you?
Oh, I do. And do you see the puzzle pieces I'm making?
Yes.
You see Frost is going to be here, T.S. Eliot and Whitman. So this is the literature one, Dylan Thomas. None of these are finished. This is a philosophy one with Schopenhauer and Wittgenstein and Camus. And they have quotes. Camus' quote is, "A work of art is a confession," which is a nice line.
Yeah, it's
But anyway,
beautiful.
so you get a sense of that. And if you can look around the studio, I can just show you back here. I don't know if you can see this. Let me move this a little bit. Can you see back there?
Yes.
It's just a lot of sculptured heads. There's Arnold Palmer and Payne Stewart, and I did the National Air Force Memorial, the Honor Guard, and you can just see them all down the line there. Jack Nicklaus.
So are these commissioned work that you're selling?
Well, they were commissions. Most of these have been finished. I'm working on the piece I'm working on now. This large piece that's almost 50 feet high. That was for Drexel University, and that's still in the works. I've got to finish that. And you see, can you see? And I'm bringing you back down to the studio. The piece for Washington was a commission. That's at the Bronze Foundry, and if you look at my website, you can see quite a lot of sculpture.
So you work on several pieces that are commissioned at one time?
I do. I'm fortunate to have several commissions, and I like doing that because I can move from piece to piece. And what happens is you learn something on one piece, and it feeds another. So it's actually a very good thing. If you can see. The studio.
Zeno, somebody asked us on the chat if you ever buy clay from North Carolina.
Well, the clay that I buy, as I say, is clay that's very old. It's been used by. It's an oil-based clay. It's not a water-based clay.
Okay.
And it's not a clay that you fire. It's and the reason I like the oil base is because I can use it again and again without keeping it wet. Rodin had to constantly had the wettest sculpture and put wet rags on it, and I don't like doing that. So it's just my preference is to have a clay, and it's a great clay. This clay is almost like a water clay. It's very easy to squeeze it and and move it. You can see it's very flexible. You see, and sticky. So I can make it into whatever I want pretty much. So I'm only really limited by my imagination and skills.
So do you get a lot of ideas? I mean, you talked earlier about being introspective and reading a lot of philosophy. And so did you read about Eisenhower? I mean, a great deal before you started?
Well, all the people pretty much that you see on the book here, when I was working on, for example, on Mark Twain, I listened to books on Mark Twain. I've read just about everything he's written almost. And I've done that with most of the people that while I'm sculpting them, I like to listen to something about them. And I have quite a collection of books on tape. And then, as I said, I belong to audible.com and there's a teaching company that also has lectures. So I go to these and I'm constantly informing myself. It's interesting for me. There's a part of my brain that it occupies while I'm sculpting, and yet it also feeds into the sculpture. So what goes into your head comes out your fingertips. Goes into the. So it's. I just think that it helps. When I've listening to what he was as an individual, it helps me to create the sculpture.
Because it's so alive. I mean, sculpture
thank you.
It's just, isn't that what it's so like? It's so. I very many years ago, not that many years ago, but several. We had a Rodin exhibit here, in North Carolina, and I don't think I could have spent enough time there. I was just, and we have a lot of Rodin now, and I am just in awe, and I love it.
Well, Rodin is particularly impressive because of his vitality to his figures and the lifelike quality. Now, some sculptors are a little more stylized, but for him it was very important to show a sense of vitality. Here I am, and to have it coming right up through the fingertips. You have it all through the body. It's all pulsating. Now he would show if one muscle was relaxed, another one was tensed or stressed, and he would and the whole figures have a sense of life and movement. Movement was important. He thought if you show a figure moving, then you've got a sense of life. This is a Mark Twain. I just wanted to show you down here, and I mean, it's obviously as long as we're moving, we're alive.
Well, I can tell you that. There were times that I stood next to a sculpture of his, and I felt like I was moving. I mean, I almost lost my balance once. I mean, I don't know. Does that normally happen to a person?
Well, he has which piece were you looking at? He has a piece called the John the Baptist. Pardon?
It was a very tall sculpt. I can't recall what it was, but it was very, very tall. And I stood by it, and I started swaying.
He has a sculpture of John the Baptist walking, and he wanted to get a sense of movement in it, so he didn't want it to be frozen in one moment in time. And he has the back part of it in kind of one moment, and the shifting into the next moment. So it's kind of an awkward, when you take the pose, it's awkward in a sense because it's actually two movements in one figure. And he learned that from Myron, the Greek sculptor who did the Sculptolus, the discus thrower, this idea of having because when we observe people, we don't see them like a photograph does where you capture in one moment. We see them kind of move through time. So he tries to get a sense of that.
Well, of dimension.
Of time, the dimension, fourth dimension.
Right.
Because he's working with 3 dimensions, but he's trying to, and I did that with the Freedom Sculpture. I tried to have the 4th dimension be the time of the 4 figures, kind of sequentially from left to right as you read it, going through the motion, the movement of struggle and breaking free.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's obvious to me when you're looking at a sculpture, you can almost see it breathe.
Oh, well, I think that's important. Again, for me, even when I'm working on someone like Ike or Churchill back there, who, again, I listened to a lot of books while I was working on it, I want to kind of bring them back to life. I sort of, I feel a little bit like Dylan. I kind of, when he talks about in his poem about, rejecting death and struggling against it, I want to do. I feel a sense of that. I mean, you can't. In the end, that's that you're going to pass as everyone and everything does. But it's still something that I feel like I want to bring people back to life, and I try to do it as much as I can. When I sculpted my father, I knew he was going to die. He was 90 years old, or his late 80s when I started. And I thought, well, I'll have this when he's gone. So I do have it. And before my mother passed, I sculpted her as well. So it's a way of kind of keeping them three-dimensionally, and they're here in the studio, and I can move around them.
That is extreme. Do you talk to them?
Me. Pardon?
Do you talk to the sculptures?
Not out loud.
That's a great...
They don't talk back per se, but you... if you put something into a piece, hopefully it speaks to other people, and it speaks to me too. Right. Because you've articulated something.
We have a question on the chat again, and they want to know, how did you choose who you were going to feature in Knowledge is Power?
I just chose who I wanted to, and the client who came up, with the money and just said, knowledge is power is aligned by Francis Bacon, and said, choose who you want. And I wanted to pick people who I liked, or people who were interesting, who affected, who created knowledge that was powerful. And again, Gandhi with his nonviolence, with King and his continuation of that, and the way he applied it with Thomas Jefferson, all men are created equal, and so on. They're great. And of course, he went back to Montesquieu and others. But I wanted people with powerful ideas, like Thomas Paine, Henry Thoreau, of course, Darwin. I thought the main figures for me, the great ideas with evolution. You have the Darwin, and then you have with physics, and you have Einstein, who came up with with so much, not just the E equals MC squared, which is there, but also with quantum early on, before even Niels Bohr. So I just picked people I thought. You can't put everybody in the book, and there are people come in here and say, well, why don't you have so and so? Well, because there are a lot of pages in the book, and I tell them they're on another page. I just have it open to this page, these two pages. So.
Do you have many people coming into your studio?
Not really. Inviting you in is rare. It's unusual. I don't usually do this, but you get into kind of a what's the word? You get into kind of a rhythm and into a sense where you don't want to be interrupted, and you have to work, and you can very easily be distracted and not get the work done, or lose your thought, or lose your creative place. So not very much. I think for writers or sculptors, painters, it's a very lonely, for the most part, for most people, not everybody, but it's a solitary occupation or activity. It's not a group thing. It's like
but you're sculpting something that seems so. It seems so alive. What you're sculpting, that it's almost like you're not really alone. You're with Eisenhower.
Well, I'm surrounded by people. Yeah, it's fun when you say that. I can look around, and I've got all these athletes I've sculpted, and there are a lot of figures, and many of the people I sculpted who posed for me are now gone. I can look around. I'm looking across at a general that posed for me, started the Green Berets, and he was 93, and he told me stories about him with Eisenhower and others. He's dead. I can go through. There's so many people, and it reminds me, and yet, in a way, they're still here, and they're still in my memory. They stimulate my memory, and in a way that just seeing a name, something verbal, wouldn't. By having them, I think there is a need for us to have the three dimensions. Obviously, we live in that world. So I want.
Amnon just said you've come a long way from your mother's dough. So I want to ask you something. So now that you've done this show with us, has anything changed for you in these moments?
Well, it is interesting for me to have to verbalize things that I don't usually say out loud. I mean, there are people who come in, I talk to my friends and people who come into the studio, but it is interesting to kind of self-reflect and think about these things, although they're all kind of transient too. I almost hate to say them out loud because I want to be able to change them. I don't want them frozen now. They'll be online somewhere. And like Emerson and Walt Whitman, I'll have to deny that consistency is a hobgoblin of little minds, one said. And do I contradict myself? Well, I contradict myself. I want the possibility to change and develop and grow. I mean, I feel like I'm still growing. But it's interesting to hear I'm thinking things as we go along here. I'm kind of extemporaneously thinking about some of these things. And of course, some of them I've thought about in the past, but I don't teach and I don't lecture, so I don't really have any set thing to say. I'm kind of speaking off the...
But isn't that the same thing as your work, though? I mean, you're sculpting a conversation. And it's no different than your work. I mean, we could come back to the same conversation, and hopefully maybe we will come back and visit again and add to it and change it some and just then leave it alone and go to another conversation.
Yeah, I'm not sculpting just for myself. It is a communication. When I'm sculpting, like someone like Ike or any of the things, the book that I'm, specifically the ideas which mean more to me because they're about ideas and freedom or growth with the 50-foot piece that I'm doing or knowledge here. They're about, I'm doing them with the idea, just like an actor might on a stage of communicating to an audience. I have people in mind, and it helps me to do that in a way because I can hone I get some responses when people come in, and I think about what will people think of this, and so that I can make it better. I'm constantly trying to improve it, and even when I show this to people as I'm working on it, there are a couple of people that I'll show it to and get feedback, and then I try to improve it. I mean, there are it's a journey that it's not set out for me. I don't know where I'm going to end up with a lot of this, which is a great thing about it. That's how it mirrors life in a way that you don't know. I mean, we all know where we're going eventually, but the journey is so unknown. It's so
right. Well, I know.
I can't hear you.
I feel the same way. I feel that I don't have when I come here at night. Don't have a clue really what's going to happen. And even though you and I chatted today, the conversation was so, and I don't normally talk the day of with our guests, but it was so fresh, and it was so fun, and so natural that I just knew that no matter what you and I spoke about earlier, we would have an entirely new kind of conversation and freshness.
Oh, well, thank you. But, the interesting thing about working when you're an artist, and I'm sure it's true of poetry, and it's one of the valuable things about poetry as well as sculpture and painting, you're reaching towards some kind of truth. It's your own personal truth, but it's your interaction with nature, with the world. And so it's you and nature, and that interaction of the two, the subset, that's the art that you're creating. And you're creating something that's true. And you're moving. It makes you really really look at the world and try to be. Even though art has an element of fantasy and imagination and all that, of course, too. But it's just interesting because you're on how to explain it. It's hard. See, it's hard to talk about sculpture because again, it's not verbal.
I know.
But it's an interesting. Because you're working on it and you're also learning about yourself as you work. It's also self-discovery.
Right.
And it's
this art for me is the same way. Every night I leave here, stronger, more wise, and because of all the people that I'm learning from. And what I have loved about this conversation with you and learning about you is that you are every man's sculptor. You are for the children. You are for a woman, a man. You're for somebody who's struggled. You are somebody. You're there for somebody who is learning. I mean, you're covering such a panoramic experience. I mean, I'm looking at your things, and you have something for everyone.
Well, I think for me, the human condition is the primary fertile ground that you're working with, that you're farming in a sense, and you're trying to develop plants, growth. I'm not a farmer, or a gardener, but in a sense, all these sculptures are things that I'm creating out of this very, very fertile area. I mean, the human condition is just so broad and significant, and the pathos, and also the cerebral part of it, and I just think it's exciting for me, and I'm hoping that it will be for other people. There are sculptors who work with things that are more abstract, and that's fine. I feel like there's abstract elements of some of my pieces in terms of big design, but I want to do things that have an emotional and a cerebral element, a kind of a balance of what Nietzsche talked about, the Dionysus and Apollo, which is the emotional and that which is more cerebral. And I think if you get a nice balance of those two, that it makes it, for me, it makes it a more interesting work of art.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's what I honestly. There's so much of what you said I agree with. I'm even shocked myself. I mean, you're speaking my truth.
Well, that's great. I think that, as I said, again, and I'm speaking very personally, but again, what I said about the freedom, if I can reach down and speak very, very personally, it is universal, I think, because on some level, that's where we're all alike. And, it's the nice thing when you talk about art, when you read a poem, and what I love about poetry is if you're reading Matthew Arnold or Eliot or Frost or someone, and you're thinking, I have these same feelings. And it makes you not feel so alone in the world. You know that other people have had these same feelings, and they're very true feelings, because they're not lying in their poetry generally or their art. They're hopefully they're expressing their true self. It's almost like a diary. It is almost like a confession.
Well, when I saw the Freedom Wall, you confirmed for me the work that I was doing. I knew I was on the right track when I saw that wall. I knew that what I was doing and what I wanted to do was important, because I saw it. I saw this, and it was right there for me to see, and I saw exactly what I wanted to do. There's a question out here, Zenos again, and it said, I heard someone say that the sculpture is within the cement block and you just have to chip it out. Is that true?
Well, Michelangelo said that he saw a sculpture in a marble block, and that he had just take away the parts that weren't part of the sculpture. He had to knock. Now I work in a different way. That what I see, I'm adding clay, and not taking away. But basically, artists, you're starting with a concept, and you're developing it. And I think I'm going back to what you were saying, and you and I are both. I think you're doing with your show. You're trying to help people. You're trying to get people, I guess, to express themselves and to help them with their struggle. And I was hoping to do that with the sculpture of freedom. And I think so. I think that's why you are relating to what I did. Is that correct?
Yeah, and when this friend sent it to me and I saw it, honestly, it was everything that I couldn't literally express. You expressed in sculpture. So you see, you express in sculpture what I can't really verbalize, and maybe sometimes I'm verbalizing what you might not verbalize, but you're doing a very good job of it. But
of course,
yeah. And when I saw that, I think it was 5,000 people in this had liked it. It said to me, keep going, because people need permission to break free. They need permission to struggle, and they need permission to know that on the other end of struggling for this particular situation, there's freedom. But you got to go through the struggle, because otherwise there's no freedom.
You have to. You have to, and it's other people can't do it for you. You have to do it yourself. It's that whole, the hero's journey that you have to do it. That struggle, that journey yourself.
You have to.
Zenos, talking about breaking free. Are you being called?
Yes.
Are you being called there because people, quote unquote, broke something free from the sculpture to fix it?
Oh no one has ever broken any part of it. I mean, there's a part of the maquette that I guess might be a little vulnerable. No one has actually hurt the sculpture.
Very nice.
I've seen the sculpture hurt people. I saw somebody walking by once, and he wasn't looking quite where he was going. He ran into it, and I felt embarrassed. But no, but it's. I think that people do not generally. A sculpture like this, they don't spray paint it or try to hurt it because of their figures. Unless they're the kind of person that would try to hurt another person.
Yeah.
Because these are like people.
Wow.
So if it's a wall, that's different. But if there's a kind of they realize that in a sense these are like people, and they don't. I've never had a problem with it. There's never been up till now. There hasn't been any kind of graffiti or damage to the sculpture. Bronze is very durable. It's very I mean it's one of the reasons that I work. Bronze and white people have worked in sculpture for so many years, since it was the Venus of Willendorf and other pieces that go back into prehistory, because it lasts, and a lot of the history we have even today is in terms sculpture or archaeological pieces have been dug up.
Right. I hate to say this because this has been just so exciting for me, but guess what? We have been on for an hour, and we are at the end of our show time. And I thank you so much for opening your studio, your heart, your mind, and sharing all of this with us. It has been absolutely delightful, and I've loved every minute of it, and I thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been delightful for me.
And
I thank you for for this rapport that we've had.
Do it again?
Yes, please.
Okay, good. I'll be in touch, and we'll do it again, and we'll talk about other things. And you can show us other things. Maybe one day I'll come up there and we'll do it real live.
That'd be great.
So your website is what? Can you tell everyone? Zenos, can you hear me?
It's www.zenosfrudakis.com. Zenos is a Zenos Frudakis.
Perfect. All right.
And see my works in progress there, and you can see what I'm working on, and click on some of the pictures and see them larger and where they are. There's a lot there.
Cool. Wonderful. Well, I thank you, and I thank Ro. You're out there. I thank you so much for being so gracious with me when I called, and I asked if this extraordinary artist could be on my show, and you said, of course. And you know what she said? She said, well, we would love to help you out. So I want to thank you, and I thank you both so very much. It's been a pleasure, and we will talk again. And everyone out there, thank you so much for joining in tonight. I know that this has been quite something for you as well, and I look forward to hearing from you. So please feel free to write me anytime at Marilyn@reenchantplanetearth.com. And next week we're starting another show at 7 o'clock. It's going to be called The Scope of Things, a business show. So we'll do 7 o'clock and we'll do 8 o'clock. We're not exactly sure how that's going to turn out, but we're doing it anyway. So tune in. And everyone out there, I love you so much. And Zenos, once again, thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. Good night, everyone.
Marilyn, thank you.
Thank you.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Sundays, 9 a.m. to noon. Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Mondays, 8 to 9 p.m. Reawaken Your Brilliance with Julie Seibert, Wednesdays, 8 to 9 p.m. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com.